right now. Great. Okay, go ahead, Rabbi Jake, then.
Good, thank you. Good evening, everybody. Erev Tov. Nice to see all familiar faces, which is a nice thing. Um, and I think that this class, this session, this conversation has been a long time coming. We just marked on Sunday 100 days since October 7th. And so this is something that's certainly been on my mind and weighing on my heart, and I know for many of you in different ways. So thank you for giving of your Wednesday evening to be here and to have these conversations. And I'm hoping that we will be conversing, so you won't be on mute for too long. At least that's my hope. Um, and I just want to put out there at the beginning that talking about Israel, especially now, and is talking about Israel and Palestine, especially now, um, can be a heavy thing, and it can be an emotional thing. And so we are bringing that into this Zoom room. I know I certainly am. And I want this to be a place where we can share, where we can express how we're feeling, we express what we're thinking about, what we're confused about. Not assuming anybody knows everything that's going on or the history of everything, because how could we? And also not acknowledging that not everybody agrees on what's happening, on where to go from here, and that this can be a place where I hope um, where people can exist and coexist despite differences. So I'm hoping that that's the space that we'll create this evening. And looking around, I'm hopeful and expectant that that will be the case as a few more people are logging on. Welcome, everybody. Um, so, in the best of times, talking about Israel is not especially easy. And of course, it only gets more difficult once we factor in the attacks on October 7th and the subsequent war with Hamas and potentially with now other groups in the region, as things seem to be escalating. Um, so, so it's not an easy thing, and um, and I don't think we should expect it to be. And I also want to acknowledge that we're talking about these big global topics, but many of us feel these things personally, either because of family in the region, connections ourselves, trips that we've taken, experiences, or just because Israel is so present in our liturgy and our text and our history and our psyche. So we're all bringing a lot of these things with us into any conversation we have about Israel, but especially tonight. So I do want to acknowledge that we might not be on the same page politically, and that hopefully we're here to talk and to listen and to learn from each other. I'm going to encourage you to keep people's emotions in mind as we go through tonight, and as well as your own, to do a check-in every so often. And I'm not expecting to solve anything tonight. Wouldn't that be nice if we could? But Anthony Blinken's not here, Abbas and Netanyahu are not attending tonight, so um, we're not setting policy. We're not deciding how the war goes or when and if a ceasefire is called or uh, what kind of a two-state or otherwise solution that we're aiming towards. That's not my goal for tonight, and that's not within our I'd say within our purview. Although you might have your own feelings about where you think things should go or how you think things should go. Um, But to start off, I wanted to just kind of bring up and name some emotions that people might be bringing into the room when thinking about Israel and thinking about Israel-Palestine, as big as that topic is. So feel free to raise your hand and unmute. You can type it into the chat. Any emotions that either you might be feeling or you can imagine others might be feeling. Lewis.
So for me, it's a lot of anxiety.
Thank you.
And I'll add to that by saying a lot of sadness.
So I'm distressed that I really don't know how to think of a correct response. I have mishpacha who are in Israel. The husband of a great niece is in the IDF.
Rod, I think
Accusations of Israel committing war against the civilian population of Gaza isn't something that I automatically turn off. And I'd like to be able to deal with that.
And I'll just say Bruce typed in the chat frustration.
Mitchell?
Unsurprisingly, I'd add anger.
Larry?
Concern for people there. I know my friend Kevin went to help out, and I got a WhatsApp today from him saying that he's going to be sent to someplace in the Negev to help with logistics, even though he's not in the army or anything. He's just a volunteer to help. But so it's very, very concerning. And also other people I know there, a person who was on the trip to Spain, lives north of Tel Aviv. Joe's favorite cousin, I also know, Sari, is there and her family. So it's not as abstract as watching the news from other places.
Joe, I think I saw your hand too.
Yeah, a sense of foreboding. It can, I do have family there, close family, and lots of friends from having worked there. And anything can happen. And I don't see a lot of positive solutions in mind. That's the other frightening thing.
Yeah. Lewis?
So uncertainty, but there's uncertainty as to what will happen in Israel, but uncertainty as to what's going to happen in this country.
Right, the reverberations of what's going on there.
I guess
Paula?
I'm confused about how to feel because, you don't want to see people killed who are innocent, but people also seem to ignore the fact that, there were people who it started out who were raped and killed and mangled and so like my sense of trying not to, like what's right to feel. It's like what are the right feelings? My friend Sharon, who I know from when we were young, lives in Israel. She's a guide, and she just wrote that there's a group coming, and she's helping to guide. They're going to visit the site where the music festival was. There are plaques all over saying what happened. Then they're going to go to see what left of the burned kibbutzim. And she's not looking forward to that, but that's what we're facing. And what's the right way to respond? It's confusing to me.
Right. So confusion is certainly there, and maybe even conflicting emotions, right? That could feel at odds, and we're not sure what to do with that.
Right.
Yeah, Bruce.
I have also fear for the present, but also fear for the longer term outcome, whatever it is, in the perspective of the world, which really scares me, because Israel didn't have all that many friends, but many of its former friends are not feeling the same way, which is more of a longer term. And I also have distant cousins in Nahariya, right below Lebanon, and I have a couple of friends of close children of close friends who live in very near Tel Aviv. So I feel very personal about that. I'm very upset.
Yeah, Joe.
In addition to the situation in Israel itself, I think the rise of anti-Semitism, virulent anti-Semitism in the U.S. and around the world is very frightening, and sort of almost unexpected.
Mhm. Yeah, Goldie.
Other than feeling like helpless because I feel like there is no solution, and I actually follow a Palestinian site. I have a friend I've emailed in the West Bank. I've been to their home, and some of you may know that Yuta's wife lives in Israel a good part of the year. She just returned here. I think I forgot what I was going to say. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's okay.
I'm just really conflicted.
Yeah, let me know if it comes back. Scott, and then Keith.
Yeah, actually, helplessness was the term that had been running through my mind. So, Goldie, you can take it from me if you want, but I feel like the anger that I felt on October 7th was immediately turned into something else, because I felt guilty about the slaughter of the Gazans that initial attack sparked. And I think it was justified, but I felt slightly bad that my anger at Hamas was not really mollified by the fact that they were being or Palestinians were being slaughtered in Gaza.
I remember what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I think a lot of this, just as in the past, the worldwide media backed Israel. I think now a lot of what you're hearing in the press, even the way adjectives are used, that whenever Israel does something, even when they talk about tunnels that they found under hospitals or communications things, it's allegedly or there's no proof. Whereas when they talk about Hamas, there's not these adjectives. It is Hamas said. So I think part of it is, and it's just like in Vietnam, the Vietnamese knew if they were patient that the tide would turn in terms of international settlement. And to add to that, I was actually on the phone for over an hour to an individual in Australia the other day, and this is as part of the World Congress. They reached out to me because they want to march in the Pride Parade in Melbourne. It's almost like government sanctioned, and the trans queer group has now objected to them being part of that parade. So that's very troubling. And most of you probably saw that even from South Africa, they've the captain of their World Cup soccer team, they've demoted him from his position with the statement because he's Jewish and he came out in support of Israel. So there's definitely, it's a little scary. Like I have a hand size Hamsa on my home, and for a minute, I actually thought of taking it down. And instead of that, I actually, for Hanukkah, I put a huge sign up there that it was obvious that I was Jewish. I put little rainbow Jewish flags in my yard because I decided I'm not going to hide. I'm just not going to hide. I've been a victim of hate crimes and anti-Semitism, and I'm not going to hide anymore.
Scott.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the exact word is, and following up on some of what was just said, it all comes to my mind, which is that um, I don't feel guilty, even though maybe I should, about my sympathies being entirely one-sided. I only have so much sympathy and empathy to go around. And, it's like if someone, if someone in your family got killed, you'd feel horrible. A neighbor around the corner that you don't know gets killed, you feel bad for a minute. And you can't take so much in. So I feel like I just can't take in that much more.
Thank you for sharing that. Larry, I saw a hand, and then Sue, I think, see a hand over there too.
I was very surprised the day after Thanksgiving. I saw a whole bunch of cousins, and one of them, a young couple with 3 kids who lives in Tribeca in Lower Manhattan, said that their 2 older kids are old enough now to take Lyft and Uber by themselves, and they changed their names on their Lyft accounts so that they wouldn't have obviously Jewish names out of fear that they might be in danger from certain Lyft and Uber drivers. And I was really taken aback by that. And that was back in late November.
Thank you. Yes, Sue?
I'm not responding to what Larry just said, although ouch, ow. I'm going to go back to some of the other comments, and that is, I think we can both hold in horror what happened on October 7th and how Israelis were massacred, but also some horror at the way the Gazans are being massacred now. And it feels like there's a lack of the long-term plan of how are we going to win back some possibility for a 2-state solution. And it seems to me that it's not a question, Scott, of sympathy. It's a question of long-term hope, that if we continue doing what Netanyahu has been doing on the West Bank, this kind of thing is going to keep happening. And we need something better. And that's what I would like myself to focus on in terms of hope.
As I was sort of brainstorming possible emotions, even for myself, I wrote down hope and was kind of wondering, do I feel that right now? I'm not sure. So thank you for kind of framing that kind of hope. Mitchell and then Scott.
Well, I mean, in Israel, at least, there's the political aspect, which we can get into or not get into, but I think it's central to what's going on now. And, so that's one thing. But what I wanted to put out to the group is some understanding of the anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism dichotomy. I think part of the problem, on several levels, is that what does everybody mean by anti-Zionism? I don't tend to think that people are necessarily using it in the same way. For example, you could say Zionism is occupying the West Bank, or Judah and Samaria. Or you could just say a homeland for the Jewish people. If the right to a homeland is where you stop, everything else is anti-Semitism. If it's more, a matter of conquering, then that makes it a little more difficult to discuss or argue about.
Thanks, Scott.
Yeah, I wanted to thank Sue for bringing up hope, because despite what I said, I still have hope, and I think that's a very different thing. I took a class recently on choosing hope and Jewish sources, and that's really what has kept us going for as long as we have been going, and why we're still here. So there's always hope. Yeah, and Yeah, Mitchell raised an interesting point too about definitions and understanding what people are objecting to. You know, sometimes it's a fine line, and there's a lot of things you could argue about there. And I don't even know where to start, but Sue mentioned Bibi too, and you know, it's always so interesting to me how, and believe me, you know, I wouldn't defend him for a half a second. But he's kind of used as a bogeyman sometimes for people who just want to criticize what Israel is doing, you know, and you could. I watch news in Israel, from Israel in Hebrew, and hear all the commentators and all the people who have very interesting things to say. And today there was really interesting discussion about how nobody's really in charge. And it made a lot of things make sense. I mean, yeah, Bibi still calls some of the shots, but that speech he gave about the war continuing to next year, I mean, that's not what people really think. That's Bibi trying to keep himself out of jail. But I have hope, and I have actually faith in the Israeli people and some of their institutions, even the ones that didn't quite work right on before October 7th, but they're accepting responsibility and going forward and trying to figure this out. You know, nobody knows an answer, obviously, but I think that by and large, people want to get somewhere. They want to get somewhere. I think the Americans, from what I can glean, are doing, I mean, we're very fortunate who's in charge and the people who work for him. You know, they make a lot of statements, and sometimes maybe some people don't agree with the statements, but I have the sense that behind the scenes that they're doing amazing stuff to try to move things along. So we'll see.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Scott.
No, that's all right.
Okay, June.
I guess I feel both part of the family and not part of the family, because I don't have the same strong identity that many people do. So I was just going to bring up one other point. I'm personally a fence sitter in this, and I just read just tonight before we started, Fareed Zakaria has I don't know, an email or something that I get, and the title of it was Psychological Contributions to Understanding What's Happening. And he cited a lot of psychological research about intergenerational trauma and shared long-term trauma. And it reminded me that this is one episode in a huge, huge history of things happening in this area. And the one hopeful piece that he had wasn't so much solve it, but that people who work in this area psychologically acknowledge that the only way forward when groups have this feeling is when one group can acknowledge the suffering of the other group, because each group is trying to out-victim the other, and acknowledging this aspect of the other's life is somehow breaks the ice sometimes. Not always, but I had a little bit of hope from that as well. So thank you for opening up the discussion.
Sure. Bob, I think I saw a hand. You'll have to unmute.
Oh.
Oh, did we lose them? Oh, there you go.
There we go. Right? Can you hear me? Oh, good. You know, I still have hope for this situation. but in much the same way as I felt about the Vietnam War, I understood that to have hope about something doesn't mean that you just feel that, but you have to take some steps. You have to do something. And I really agree with the last woman who was speaking, the whole issue of accepting responsibility. And I think that it's time for the Israeli government to really accept responsibility for the fact that the way they're going about this is killing more people that are innocents. And I think it's important to, this morning or yesterday evening, I read something, I think it was on the New York Times, about the Israeli military now identifying and showing the vast network of tunnels that are completely honeycombing the whole area there in Gaza. And one of the experts basically said it's going to take years because they can't just go in and blow it up, but all of them are like booby trapped, mined. Some of them had elevators and various things already installed in them. But I would hope that the government would listen to what those military people are saying, and that's it. It's going to take years. And so that's where they should be putting their focus on destroying the infrastructure that is protecting Hamas. And at the same time as they're doing that underground, so to speak, I think they should begin to do something for, the innocents in terms of supporting them and trying to find a much more, I think, humane way of dealing with trying to figure out essentially a very difficult question. Who are the good guys and who are the bad guys above the ground? I know it's complicated, but it seems like it's going to take years. It's already taken years, and it's time, I think, for the Israeli government to really do something different than what they're doing now.
All right. I think I saw 3 more hands that I'll take, and then I want to move on to another thing. So Lewis.
So going along with what Larry said about the relatives changing their screen name, one of the things that I feel is exasperation. So I had a couple friends who were there visiting when this all happened, and they had trouble getting out. And one of the days that they were just sitting around waiting to figure out if they were when they were gonna get out, Jeannie took a walk on the beach and she ran into an Israeli lady who started talking to her about what it is really like to be living in Israel. And the Israeli said to Jeannie, now you've had the full Israeli experience and you know how we feel. And that's just so disturbing to me.
Thank you. Larry, did I see a hand as well?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a sort of another area of concern to me is that I feel like Israel, in addition to losing friends all over the world with other governments that maybe had been somewhat friendly before, is losing a big part of the younger American Jewish population. I mean, the kids who are teenagers and in their 20s, I think this has really pushed them away from supporting Israel. And I think my fear is that Israel will never get their support in the future, that it's a whole generation that's going to be lost to them, and they will not be supporting Israel the way their parents and their grandparents' generations have supported Israel.
Scott?
Yeah, a couple things. Yeah, I appreciate what Bob said, and I was talking about the news today that I saw. I really am getting the feeling that there's, the two goals of breaking up Hamas, destroying Hamas, and getting the hostages back were always put out there. They're a little bit self-contradictory, and the whole thing about the tunnels, and I mean, that's the reason they just don't destroy the tunnels in some other way. You know, and they're finding out that, you know, more of the hostages are dead. And I think they're coming to a point where they may realize that, and even they said that Bibi switched the order in his last speech. He used to say, destroy Hamas and get the hostages out, and he just said it the other way around. So that may have been a clue that they're starting to figure out that they really do need to have some sort of, whatever word you call it, ceasefire, or, you know, even a temporary agreement for them perhaps to do that. I don't know if that'll work. And what the terms will be. Obviously, that's a really difficult negotiation, but maybe that's what will happen. They already are adjusting their military tactics. I mean, it's a tragic situation there. There's no doubt about that. I did see a statistic, though, comparing the number of combatants versus civilians that were killed here. It was way less than other wars. I mean, that's what Israel said. And they, you know, I guess you can argue with them, but I take them sort of at their word. And that doesn't make it right, and it doesn't make it any better when kids are killed. Although they do count as kids, people under 18, and some of them are actually in Hamas, are Hamas fighters. So, you know, definitions again. And then something Larry said. What did you say, Larry? It's going to add on to. That's all right. I'll wait.
James, and then I want to offer a couple of.
If you want to move on, I'm happy to comment.
No, please.
So some of you know I was supposed to be in Israel on October 13th as part of a tour that was run by a company that was founded by an Israeli and a Palestinian, and it was going to introduce us to different LGBTQ groups and Palestinian groups and settler groups, and of course that did not occur. So, you know, I have feelings all over the map, like many of you. I, you know of people. I have Palestinian coworkers, and they've lost family. So it's a mix across the board, and I just also have concerns, as we all did before this even happened, about the turn to the right with Israel and starting to take away rights from women and the LGBTQ community. Which is a concern that I have here in the US, right, with just kind of extremism and Christian nationalism and extremism within Islam. And, you know, it's unfortunately a lot of that is happening in Israel as well, too, which I think makes it even more difficult to find middle ground and to find a way to some kind of coexistence, some kind of peace. Because that's what it will be at some point, right? Yeah, so just a lot of conflicted feelings about the government and in Israel not doing some things that maybe they could have done in advance. I have very strong feelings, of course, about Hamas. But I feel like a lot of people are caught in the middle of this.
Thank you for that. Yes, Scott, last word.
Just real quick, I remembered Larry was talking about young people, and just to put more hope out there, there were an awful lot of young people at the rally that was held in DC in November, so all is not lost.
So in thinking about the conversations we have around what's going on in Israel and with the Palestinians, and thinking about, you know, how we discuss it even within ourselves, a couple of texts or values came up for me that that I'm trying to hold close. One, and maybe this is the most obvious, is the idea of B'Tselem Elohim, that that each and every human being has some godliness within them, and that is very difficult to remember at times. That when we are talking about a group of people that is not us, and we might even say is an enemy, that it's our role to remember that there is some spark of God within each and every person. So that's one thing that I'm thinking about and struggling with. Another is a virtue of dan lachol adam lachaf zahut, that we judge each person according to merit. That we, when dealing with somebody in front of us, perhaps someone we disagree with vehemently, that we first try to judge them positively. Of course, it doesn't have to end there, but that should be our first instinct. And finally, in a rabbinic phrase, Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim chayim, that when the school of Hillel and the school of Shammai were arguing about a particular law, a heavenly voice came down and said, both these and those are the words of the living God. Meaning that both groups, both factions in this argument were speaking holy words, even if one of them was in the wrong. And so in hearing opinions that differ from my own, and I'll say let's take away some of the most extreme ones, but let's think about some arguments that we've heard or some takes on events that we've heard that have unsettled us. Where is the holiness in what this person is trying to say? Is it finding humanity? Is it sympathy? So where is that godliness in their words? How are they trying to speak words of the living God? So those, for just as a textual basis, kind of what came up to me. I'm sure there are many others that we could think of, but those are the ones that I've been rolling around in my brain. And tonight, and I would encourage us beyond tonight, to frame conversations in certain ways. And I found the ADL had a nice list of 10 tools and strategies for having conversations about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And so I wanted to summarize some of that for us. One is to complicate rather than oversimplify, to foster empathy, to humanize and not dehumanize, which I think we've been doing by distinguishing between the Palestinian people and groups like Hamas and Hezbollah and Islamic Jihad. So getting away from stereotypes and generalizations. They encourage, let's not hold Jewish people or Jewish institutions responsible for the policies and actions of the Israeli government. And I'll put in my own that it is not on us to come up with those solutions or saying, here's what I think the Israeli government should do at this moment, because number one, they're not listening to us. And number two, that isn't necessarily what we need to do in this moment. Let's acknowledge that misinformation and disinformation is widespread, and we might not have all or the best information. So looking into the news sources that we have been relying on, and also the ones that we might have been ignoring. So including nuanced perspectives in where we get our information. Also listening to and centering voices that have personal experiences and familial ties and trauma associated with the region. That when we look at this big topic, it's sometimes hard to remember that there are individuals that are affected by it and have views on it who are living through it, and that we would do well to listen to those voices. To hold space for the distinct experiences of pain and trauma that Jewish and Palestinian people carry from this conflict, and listening to different people's narratives without attempting to correct or rank them builds empathy and perspective taking skills. So a few tips from the ADL that I just wanted to lift up, and that I know I have not in the last 100 days or beyond always abided by these rules or these tools. So they're good reminders for myself as well. I also found an article in Tablet, a magazine, an online magazine, that I thought was interesting and challenging, and reframed sort of what our role is. And so what I wanted to do is because I think it's a little too long just to read out loud to you all, I want to put it in the chat, and I want to give you some time to read it. And then maybe we can go into a couple of breakout rooms and just share any reflections on the article, and how it strikes you. So Mindy, you might need to make me a co-host in order to make those breakout rooms. So I'm going to put the link to the article in the chat, and I'll go on mute once it's there, and just invite you to take some time to read through the article, digest it, and in a little while I'll ask to see how we're doing and who needs more time. So you should see it right there in the chat. there anybody who would like a little bit more time with the article before I send you to breakout rooms? Oh, June, were you raising your hand?
Just
You're
a
on
little bit more time.
You're
A
on
little-
mute, June.
A little bit more time. Okay, a little bit more time. Another minute or so. Right, in just a moment, you should see an invitation, or it might just send you to the breakout room. 5 minutes or so to share some reflections, reactions to the article. And of course, if people feel like they need more time, we can always extend that.
All participants have been invited to join breakout rooms.
It might not have put you in one as the host. Welcome back. Anything that came up for you or in the group that you wanted to share with everybody? Bob? You're muted.
There we go. I was just saying, and then we switched back to a bigger group. I don't remember which person it was, but somebody was talking about losing the current younger generation of American Jews in terms of what the Israeli government is doing. And I think the same thing to worry about is, how there may be a lot of Palestinian innocents that are now going to be lost in terms of feeling any kind of a sense of safety around representatives, whether it be military or whoever, of the Israeli government. And that's why I think it's so important to look not at like what's a long-term solution, but what are some very reasonable steps that can be taken quickly to begin to lessen some of the pain and suffering of innocence, and to stay focused on the continued military activity of locating and doing something about Hamas and destroying their infrastructure.
Thanks, Goldie.
Just real quick, I'll say the same thing I said to my group after reading this article. I think it's BS because I don't think it's realistic. I think it's very idealistic. I think it ignores the entire history. It ignores the entire history of well over 750,000 Jews, every single Jew not asked to leave the Arab lands, but kicked out when Israel became a country. Israel didn't ask all the Arabs to leave. Also, it doesn't address the fact that nothing's going to get in unless Hamas wants it to. That's reality. And I doubt seriously if any of the Hamas leadership and most of the rank and file is hungry, is starving, is cold, and nobody's talking about that realism, or the fact that it's not in the best interest of most of these Arab countries who don't want refugees in their land, never have. I don't know how much aid they're giving, but it's really not in their best interest for there to be peace, because then things are going to focus on them. So anyway, I'm sorry about being angry. As I said, I feel my anger, there's a lot of angst when I think about all the pawns that are losing their lives over this.
So were you reacting to a part of the article that you thought was BS, or I wasn't?
I just think the whole thing is.
Sorry for my children yelling.
I think it's very unrealistic, and it leaves out a lot of details, and it's not. I don't see it as a solution. I see it as well, again, I don't see it as realistic. I don't see it as happening. There's too many geopolitical things that are in place that are beyond our control, no matter what we do. Because you see the on both sides, you see the protests, you see the marching, and there may be a lot of movement behind the scenes, but I can't believe Hamas is going to come to the table and be willing to talk. And again, I can't believe that most of the Arab nations, that it's in their best interest for there to be peace. And now I'll be quiet.
Okay. Scott?
So I'll be optimistic too, or in contrary to Barb. I mean, I think if I understand what you said, Goldie, what you're challenging is the idea that you can just leave it to the people themselves, which was one of the points of the article, and that she also wrote that when it's imposed from outside, it's only led to more conflict and disaster, which I mean, I think is an interesting point. I guess I would agree with you that it's not realistic because of so many things. And you know, a lot of people theorize that Hamas chose this timing because of the imminent deal with Saudi Arabia, which kind of cuts against your view that the Arab states, or at least some of them, don't want to get beyond this situation. I think they might, and I think that's also something that holds out hope. I mean, you know, the short term is difficult, but something will change. Things always change. And you know, the government in Israel is very likely to change at some point, hopefully sooner rather than later. And that'll just create a different, I won't say a whole new, but a different playing field in a sense. If you've got the US, if you've got Saudi Arabia, if you have people in the government in Israel, and there are some who are open to some of this, and they were open to a deal with the Saudis. It could still happen. So I have some hope.
Thanks. Rod?
So maybe I'm on the pessimistic side. You know, American Jews definitely have the ability to influence Israel and Israeli policy. We really don't have the ability, to my mind's eye, to influence who the people of Gaza will choose once the active fighting by the Israelis ends. To my mind's eye, you know, the Palestinian Authority, having authority in both sides, will be a government that I'm not happy with. And, you know, I recognize that as reality. Period.
So one reason why I brought this article is because I think a lot of discussions around Israel and Palestine get especially difficult and heated when we try to figure out what should happen, right? Or who's to blame for this particular moment or that particular moment. And what I read the article is saying is those aren't fruitful conversations. And in fact, you know, are not necessarily in line with sort of how we view ourselves, right? That we don't want to engage in colonialist thinking and imposing our will on others. But we maybe have an exception for, you know, because we feel a connection to Israel as Jewish people, that we have an exception and feel like we should, you know, have a say in what happens there, or we should offer our opinion and convince other people that our opinion is correct. But you know, so much of, at least, you know, I'll speak about when I was on my college campus at UC Davis. There was so many instances of conflict at Hillel, but also with members of Students for Justice in Palestine, that, you know, we're about policy. We're about who's right and who's wrong, and who, you know, who should give up land and who should move towards peace. And the way I read this article is saying those aren't the conversations that even will lead to peace. And it's not for us to decide. It's for people who are living there to make those decisions. And so that's why I brought the article, because it shifted the way I think about which conversations are most important to have about Israel and Palestine. Larry.
It reminds me of a story of an Israeli representative of the government was giving a talk in New York City some years ago, and this is maybe 20 or 30 years ago, and you know, someone very in the audience very vehemently said to him, you know, yelled up from the audience, you know, don't you dare give them 1 inch of our land. And he said, I promise not to give them 1 inch of Brooklyn.
Thanks for sharing that, Joe.
One thing which I find very troubling, I thought the article was quite interesting, but one thing I find very troubling is how, and Rod, I think, talked about this earlier, how young people are so turned off to Israel now. And I read an article in the New York Times this week, maybe yesterday or the day before, that talked about sort of this beginnings of a movement to have Judaism without Israel, excise Israel, exorcise Israel from the whole Jewish experience. And I find that really kind of frightening, because it goes against our entire history of this idea that we're all responsible for one another and that kind of thing.
Bruce?
And I have a related, but it's sort of a reverse issue of how to separate the portion of newly enhanced terrible anti-Semitism that is based more on assuming that we all are on the side of Israel's government, which is different in my mind from being pro-Israel. And that's the part I'm singularly struggling with, because even among younger Jewish people, but certainly among the younger left-leaning non-Jewish people that are becoming anti-Semitic in the American anti-Semitism rather than in anti-Israeli government, which is still not necessarily anti-Zionist, but there's, in my mind, three gradations. But I'm just trying to say what my thought and my feelings are, but I don't know how to resolve any of it.
Another question that I want to put out there, since we're reflecting and have a more free-flowing conversation, is for this group in particular, how does it feel, or what does it mean to be Jewish and be part of the larger queer community? And how does a queer Jewish identity affect all of this? Larry?
Well, there was a sign of people marching with a big sign that's Queers for Palestine. And it's like, do you know what they would do to you there? I mean, being gay, being openly gay in Palestine is not healthy, shall we say. I mean, not conducive to long, healthy life. And being gay in most other Arab countries is also illegal, often results in jail or fines or discrimination or something. And so the idea that people could be so misinformed that, the only safe place in the Middle East to be gay is Israel. And it's just like the only safe place in the Middle East to be Christian is in Israel. But people are very misinformed about a lot of things.
Mitchell?
But yeah, they're misinformed, but also my feeling is, and I mentioned this in the breakout, that Jews now are in the same position that gays, are with reference to evangelicals, which is where, as I understand it from an evangelical perspective, we're inherently evil, so they do not have to accept anything we say. That just by its nature, it's wrong and they can ignore it. And much about the discussion that's going on now with Israel, the Jewish perspective is lost because, you're all evil, you're all colonialists, and therefore I don't even have to pay attention to, what you offer.
It's true. I was talking with a cantor who's trans, and they were saying that it's very interesting because in their, I don't know if it's TikTok or Instagram or whatever feed they were on, Twitter, half of the people that they follow are in the Jewish world and half are in the queer world, and feeling at home in both places, but also having very different things being posted and very different messages from those two different communities, and trying to sort of square that circle and better understand why are there these conflicting voices from these two different groups of people that I feel a part of. So that's one of the reasons why I asked the question. Yeah, Scott?
Yeah, we also talked a minute in our group about something related to that and related to young people and how they see this. And that is that there seems to be in this country, at least, you know, they've sort of taken American history and American racial issues and put them on to this conflict in a way that just doesn't fit. But we're kind of stuck with that. And so therefore, you know, in an analysis of who's the oppressed and who's the oppressors, well, then we become the oppressors. And you know, it seems to reveal just things that were accepted, that young people were educated in. And, you know, some of it relates to all of these efforts in diversity and intersectionality and all this stuff. And we've talked about that here too. And it seems like there's a very, very negative side to that, or at least, you know, everybody believes it. Well, everybody, we believe in diversity and inclusion and all that stuff. But the way that it seems, at least in some quarters, to be implemented is really led to the opposite. And I don't know how we get out of that.
I think, oh,
Go ahead.
I feel like in the last, since 2016, we've been given the okay to take a side, and it's better if you take a side, and you don't have to know the facts or really the different sides to the question, and then you could just get out there and acknowledge that your side is right and the other side is wrong. So I think that in this country, which we might not have seen quite such a separation so quickly, especially like on college campuses, it's been thrown at us and said, yeah, that's the way you do it. You know, that's the way you do it. And it makes it harder to maybe the two messages that the groups that you're like you mentioned before, you have to feel like you have to choose a side, or you know, figure out you know, why are the messages so different. But I just think there's so much more of a culture of not listening, and also accepting what someone says as truth or as a platform to stand on.
I think in part that also relates to a desire to simplify rather than complicate, that, you know, maybe we've seen since 2016 as well. Right, to draw those lines and those distinctions when they're actually much more difficult when we look at them more deeply. And that even within us, and we talked about this at the beginning of having those conflicting emotions and not really knowing what to do with those, right? That it's hard to take a side when you feel pride and shame, or you feel vengeance and sadness and guilt and all of those all at once within ourselves. June.
That's what I was going to say. I'm out. Thank you.
I'm glad we're on the same wavelength.
Well, I guess I was going to ask you to elaborate on your thoughts about how to complicate versus how to take a simple one-sided stance. It's a psychological hard thing to do, to hold two opposites at the same time, you know.
Well, you know, I think in part it does involve seeing the humanity of somebody who's saying something that is difficult to hear, and trying to find a kernel of merit in what they're saying, even when it's really painful. even when it seems to be dehumanizing us, right? And you know, we've been talking about you know, being a victim or victimizing others, and that it is possible to be both at the same time, right? And you know, one of the things I was reading was on the Reconstructionist Judaism website, an article by Rabbi Tova Spitzer about how to have these conversations in congregations. And you know, one of the things she was saying was, and I'll try to see if I can find it quickly, was that it's hard for us to comprehend that we could be, that the Jewish people, that we could might say the Israelis, that we could say the Jewish people would be oppressors because of how much we've been oppressed, that it's so difficult to comprehend that. And we also need to allow for that possibility, that it is possible. You know, whether it's happening in a given moment or not, that's to be debated, but leaving that open, that possibility of, could I be wrong, right? Or could my perspective be skewed at this very moment? And how can I get more information and really take it in? Yeah, Larry.
I'd just like to remind everybody that we have an alchet in our machzor that says, for the sin we have committed by, I'm paraphrasing, but it's close. So for the sin we have committed by oppressing others, even though we believe we could not do so because we ourselves had been oppressed.
So I think I'll leave us this evening with that conflict and that complication, because that's what it is, right? That's the reality of it. And with the hope that maybe with a tool or two that we gained tonight, that we can have some more conversations in the future, right? Even if this Zoom meeting is ending, that we can continue to have those productive conversations and do so in respectful ways. So thank you for bringing that respect tonight.
Thank you, Rabbi Jake.
Thanks, Rabbi
Thank you.
Jake. That was
Thank you.
wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank
It really
very
helps.
much.
talk to
Very,
us.
very helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.